The Middle Ages, the Anglo-Saxon period, the medieval period 449-1066. 1066 to 1485. The Norman Conquest, Battle of Hastings 1066. Beginning of the medieval period. Harold, King of England, defeated by William the Conqueror, Duke of Normandy. The Norman Conquest, consequences of Norman invasion. Inventory and seizure of property. Martial law put into effect. Strong central government established. Lines of authority clearly defined. The Norman Conquest, William the Conqueror. Efficient and ruthless soldier. Able administrator. Able to conquer the entire country. Reigned for 21 years. The Norman Conquest, the Normans descended from the Vikings. Seized and remained in northwestern France, Normandy. Adopted many French customs. The Norman Conquest, the Normans. Positives. Superb soldiers. Excellent administrators and lawyers. Great borrowers and adapters. Negatives. Lacked inventiveness. Lacked original ideas. The Norman Conquest, the fusing of the Norman and Anglo-Saxon cultures. Neither dominant. Anglo-Saxons adapted to the Norman ways. Realized they could raise their place in society through the church or through the court. Began to mingle with the Norman overlords. Thomas Becket, Henry II as Lord Chancellor, Archbishop of Canterbury. Defended the claims of the church against the interests of the king. Murdered by several of Henry's knights. Became a saint of the church and a hero of the people. Land in the feudal system. William had a great deal of land at his disposal. Retained much for himself. The rest he granted to his soldiers. Felt he was free to deed land by royal charter. Expected obedience and service in return. Introduced into England the feudal system. Land in the feudal system. Feudalism. Nobody owned land independently. Only as a vassal of an overlord, who in turn owed allegiance either to some great noble or the king. Feudalism is an elaborate chain of loyalties. Rent paid principally in military service to the overlord. Land in the feudal system. The Domesday Book. Sometimes called Doomsday. Created in 1086 by William. Many disputes occurred over vague property lines. A complete inventory of all property. Listed all landowners and showed the extent of their claims. Taxes could now be based on real property. Previously, there had been a uniform tax for all. The medieval church. Responsible for creating a common culture and a common set of beliefs in Western Europe from the 11th to 15th century. Latin became the language of all educated persons. Despite national loyalty, every person was responsible to the church. The church grew and prospered during the period. Continued to be the dominant force in preserving and transmitting culture. Medieval life. As the period progressed, herding became more important than farming. Common people now paid their overlords from their wages rather than in farm labor. Widespread production and exportation of wool encouraged the growth of cities in the north. More people began to live in towns instead of manors. Many became immensely rich. Developed native forms of literature, songs and ballads, and a native drama. Medieval life. Those new merchants were the first to form guilds. Societies to regulate prices and standards. Cottage workers also eventually formed guilds. The guild system encouraged a kind of extended family life. Medieval life. With prosperity and growth in population, the English turned to other kinds of work. The great English cathedrals often took several hundred years to build. Medieval life. Winchester Cathedral. Medieval life. Lincoln Cathedral. Medieval life. Salisbury Cathedral. Medieval life. York Minster Cathedral. Medieval life guilds were founded for many of those workers: stonecutters and masons, carpenters, glass blowers, stainers. Medieval life in the Middle Ages was difficult and challenging. Travel was difficult and challenging. Most food had to be consumed in season. No refrigeration. Winters were difficult. The difficulty of life was balanced with religious festivals, magnificent tournaments, and brilliant pageantry. Medieval life. Medieval clothing. Medieval life. Medieval clothing. Medieval life. Medieval tournament. Medieval life. Medieval festival. English law. William the Conqueror instituted written public documents for most government actions. Common law refers to law common to the whole country and all its people, instead of laws applying only to certain classes of persons. Primogeniture gave the firstborn son exclusive right to inherit his father's titles, lands and estates. English law ordeals innocence or guilt was settled by tasks. In 1215, Pope Innocent III declared that the ordeal system was irrational. Secular governments had to find a suitable replacement for ordeals. Jury system. English law: the Magna Carta. In 1215, a group of angry barons forced King John, 1199–1216, to sign the Magna Carta. Established that levies must be made with the consent of the barons. Limited the king's taxing powers. Foreshadowed the right of trial by jury and the beginnings of representative government in Parliament. The Crusades. The First Crusade was proclaimed in 1095 by Pope Urban II. The Crusades. Other crusades followed in 1191, 1202, 1217, and 1270. The Crusades. Each crusade began with a desire to rescue Jerusalem from the Turks. The Crusades. Most ended squalidly in raiding, looting, and a tangle of power politics. The Crusades. Results of the Crusades. Christian Europe exposed to Arabic culture. Commercial and intellectual horizons broadened. Knowledge and all manners of refinements in living were brought back from the East. Encouraged the ideal of true knightly behavior known as chivalry. Considerable importance in literature. Joined to the companion idea of romance. The Hundred Years' War 1337–1453. The English monarchy never voluntarily relinquished its hold on its French possessions. Numerous costly wars in France, culminating in the Hundred Years' War. Eventually England was driven from France. The Hundred Years' War. The longbow. Used by the English from the time of Edward I, 1272–1307. 6-foot bows. Yard-long arrows capable of piercing a knight's armor. Longbows and gunpowder did much to end the Middle Ages. The Black Death. In 1348, the Black Death came to England. First of a series of plagues that killed more than a third of the population. Scarcity of labor caused by the plagues resulted in the death of feudalism. The Wars of the Roses. 1455–1485. Civil war between the House of York and the House of Lancaster. House of York's emblem was the white rose. House of Lancaster's emblem was the red rose. The Wars of the Roses. In 1485, Henry VII succeeded Richard III. Henry united the feuding families through marriage. Ended the wars and founded the Tudor line. With Henry's accession, the real Middle Ages vanished. Henry VII. Richard III. Medieval literature. Romance. Medieval romance consisted largely of tales of chivalry to which were added a love interest and all sorts of wonders and marvels. Fairy enchantments. Giants. Dragons. Wizards. Sorceresses. Medieval literature. 3 principal sources. Britain. King Arthur and his knights. Based on Celtic folklore. Almost no historical basis. Illustrate chivalric ideals of honor, courage, courtesy, and service to women. Medieval literature. 3 principal sources. France. The court of Charlemagne. Medieval literature. 3 principal sources. Rome. Classical stories such as the Conquest of Troy. Geoffrey Chaucer 1340–1400. First great figure in English literature. Greatest work belongs not to romance but to poetic and humorous realism. The Canterbury Tales. Folk poetry and drama ballads. Came from the common people of early England and Scotland. Not written down but recited and sung. Flourished in the 14th and 15th centuries. Carefully collected and published in the 18th century. Influenced the whole German Romantic movement and the English Romantic poets. Folk poetry and drama. Popular drama's origins are in the Middle Ages. Miracle plays. Performed by trade guilds during holiday times celebrating religious festivals. Rough dramatizations of biblical stories. Performed on large wagons or on platforms erected in marketplaces or in yards. Wicked characters were played as comic characters. Folk poetry and drama. Morality plays took the place of miracle plays toward the end of the Middle Ages, during the dark and troubled times of the 15th century. Elaborate and sophisticated dramatic allegories in which characters representing various virtues and vices confronted one another. Most famous was Everyman. Still performed today. Although not English in origin, a thoroughly English adaptation of it soon became very popular.